In the summer of 1993, Michael Jackson was at a point in his career that most artists could only dream of. The Dangerous World Tour was breaking records across the globe. His face was on magazine covers in dozens of countries. He was, by every metric, the biggest entertainer on the planet. But within a matter of weeks, that image would fracture in a way no one could have predicted. An allegation surfaced, one that would follow him for the rest of his life. It didn't come from a tabloid rumor or an anonymous tip. It came from a 13-year-old boy named Jordan Chandler and his father, Evan Chandler, a dentist living in Los Angeles. What followed was not just a legal battle, but a media spectacle, a family torn apart, and a settlement that would raise more questions than it answered. The story didn't begin with the accusation itself. It began months earlier in the spring of 1993 when Michael Jackson met Jordan Chandler through the boy's stepfather. Jordan, known as Jordy, was a fan. His mother, June Chandler, had taken him to meet Jackson at a car rental agency where she worked. Jackson, who often formed close friendships with children, invited the family to his Neverland ranch. Over the following months, the relationship between Jackson and the Chandler family grew. Jordan visited Neverland multiple times. He traveled with Jackson. They spoke on the phone regularly. To June Chandler, it seemed like a dream come true for her son. To Evan Chandler, Jordan's father, it began to feel like something else entirely. Evan Chandler was not part of the initial relationship. He and June were divorced, and Jordan lived primarily with his mother and stepfather. But as the friendship between Jackson and Jordan deepened, Evan became increasingly suspicious. He later claimed that his son's behavior had changed, that Jordan seemed distant, that he was spending too much time with a grown man. In May 1993, Evan confronted his son. According to Evan's later testimony, he asked Jordan directly if anything inappropriate had happened. Jordan initially denied it, but Evan persisted. He arranged for Jordan to visit him, and during that visit, Evan administered a sedative called sodium amytal, a drug sometimes used in dental procedures. Under the influence of that drug, Evan later claimed, Jordan admitted that Jackson had touched him inappropriately. What happened in that room between father and son remains one of the most contested details of the entire case. Sodium amytal is known to make patients more suggestible. Critics of Evan Chandler would later argue that the drug could have influenced Jordan's statements, that a child under sedation might say what an adult wanted to hear. Evan Chandler, on the other hand, insisted that the drug simply made his son feel safe enough to tell the truth. There is no recording of that conversation, no independent witness, just a father's account and a son's subsequent accusations. What is clear is that after that visit, everything changed. Evan Chandler hired a lawyer. He contacted a psychiatrist, Dr. Mathis Abrams, who interviewed Jordan and filed a report with the Los Angeles Department of Children and Family Services. That report triggered a criminal investigation. By August 1993, the story had leaked to the press. The media frenzy that followed was immediate and overwhelming. Tabloids ran headlines suggesting guilt before any charges were filed. Television networks speculated endlessly. Michael Jackson, who had spent his entire life in the public eye, suddenly found himself at the center of the most damaging accusation imaginable. Jackson's legal team responded quickly. They denied the allegations outright. They pointed to the timing, noting that Evan Chandler had demanded money from Jackson before going to authorities. According to reports, Evan had asked Jackson for $20 million to finance film projects. When Jackson refused, Evan allegedly told a friend, "If I go through with this, I win big time. There's no way I lose. I will get everything I want, and they will be destroyed forever." That recorded phone call would later become a key piece of evidence for Jackson's defense. It suggested that Evan Chandler's motivations might not have been about protecting his son, but about financial gain. But the existence of that phone call didn't stop the investigation. The Los Angeles Police Department and the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department launched separate inquiries. Jackson's homes were searched. Photographs of his body were taken. An invasive procedure intended to compare his physical appearance to descriptions Jordan had allegedly provided. The results of that examination were never made fully public, but both sides would later claim the evidence supported their version of events. As the investigation unfolded, the pressure on Jackson became unbearable. The Dangerous World Tour continued, but Jackson's physical and mental state deteriorated. He was already struggling with an addiction to painkillers, a dependency that had begun years earlier after a burn injury during a Pepsi commercial shoot. The stress of the allegations intensified that addiction. In November 1993, Jackson abruptly canceled the remainder of his tour and entered a rehabilitation facility. In a public statement, he acknowledged his dependency on medication and insisted that the allegations against him were false. He described the investigation as a nightmare, a violation, and a betrayal by people he had trusted. While Jackson was in treatment, his legal team was facing a difficult reality. Even if the criminal investigation didn't result in charges, the civil lawsuit filed by the Chandler family was moving forward. Civil cases have a lower burden of proof than criminal cases. In a criminal trial, guilt must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil trial, the standard is preponderance of the evidence, meaning it's more likely than not. Jackson's lawyers understood that even if he was innocent, a civil trial would be a gamble. The media coverage would be relentless. The details, however distorted, would become public record. And there was always the possibility that a jury, swayed by emotion or bias, might rule against him. In January 1994, Jackson's legal team made a decision that would haunt his legacy. They agreed to a settlement with the Chandler family. The exact amount was never officially disclosed, but multiple reports placed it between $15 and $22 million. The settlement came with a strict confidentiality agreement. Jordan Chandler would not be required to testify in any future criminal proceedings. The Chandler family would not speak publicly about the case, and Michael Jackson would not admit any wrongdoing. The settlement sent shockwaves through the public. To many, it looked like an admission of guilt. Why would an innocent man pay millions of dollars to make an accusation go away? Jackson's supporters argued that the settlement was a strategic decision, that the cost of a prolonged legal battle, both financially and emotionally, was too high. They pointed out that the settlement was civil, not criminal, and that it did not prevent prosecutors from pursuing charges if they believed they had a case. But the optics were damaging. In the court of public opinion, the settlement became evidence of something dark. What many people didn't understand at the time was the legal nuance involved. A civil settlement does not stop a criminal investigation. Prosecutors are not bound by private agreements between parties. If the Los Angeles District Attorney or the Santa Barbara County District Attorney believed they had enough evidence to charge Jackson with a crime, they could have done so. But they didn't. In September 1994, both offices announced that they would not be filing charges. The Los Angeles DA cited insufficient evidence. The Santa Barbara DA, Tom Sneddon, who would later become one of Jackson's most persistent accusers, said the same. Without Jordan Chandler's testimony, which the settlement had effectively removed from the table, the case could not move forward. This is where the contradictions begin to pile up. If the settlement prevented Jordan from testifying, and that testimony was crucial to the case, why didn't prosecutors fight to compel it? In criminal cases, prosecutors have the power to subpoena witnesses. They can compel testimony even if a civil settlement has been reached. The fact that they chose not to suggests one of two things. Either they believed the case was too weak to win, or they believed that Jordan's testimony, under cross-examination, might not hold up. Critics of the Chandler family have pointed to this as evidence that the allegations were fabricated or exaggerated. Supporters of the family argue that the legal system failed Jordan, that a child should not have been forced to relive trauma in a public trial. The truth is probably more complicated than either narrative allows. Legal experts have noted that child testimony in abuse cases is notoriously difficult. Children can be unreliable witnesses, not because they are lying, but because memory is fragile and suggestible, especially under stress. Prosecutors may have concluded that without physical evidence or corroborating witnesses, Jordan's testimony alone would not be enough to convict Jackson beyond a reasonable doubt. The settlement, in that sense, may have been seen as the best possible outcome for everyone involved. The Chandler family received financial compensation, Jackson avoided a criminal trial, and the public was left to draw its own conclusions. But those conclusions were far from unanimous. In the years that followed, the 1993 case became a reference point in every discussion about Michael Jackson. When new allegations surfaced in 2003, leading to a criminal trial in 2005, prosecutors tried to introduce evidence from the 1993 case. The judge allowed limited testimony, but Jordan Chandler, now an adult, refused to participate. He did not testify. He did not make a public statement. He disappeared from the narrative entirely. His silence was interpreted in different ways. Some saw it as proof that the allegations had been false all along, a scheme orchestrated by his father for money. Others saw it as the behavior of a trauma survivor who wanted to move on with his life. Evan Chandler's life after the settlement did little to clarify the situation. He continued to assert that his son had been abused. He wrote a book about the case, though it was never widely published. He sued Jackson again in 1996, claiming that Jackson had violated the confidentiality agreement by making a statement in a music video. That lawsuit was dismissed. Evan's relationship with his son deteriorated. According to some reports, Jordan eventually cut off contact with his father entirely. In 2009, just months after Michael Jackson's death, Evan Chandler died by suicide. The circumstances of his death were not widely reported, but those close to the case suggested that he had been struggling with mental health issues for years. Jordan Chandler, for his part, has remained almost entirely out of the public eye. He has never given an interview about the case. He has never written a book or made a documentary. In 2019, when the documentary Leaving Neverland reignited public debate about Jackson's alleged behavior, Jordan did not participate. His silence has been both a shield and a source of speculation. Without his voice, the 1993 case remains frozen in time, a series of accusations, denials, legal maneuvers, and unanswered questions. The impact of the 1993 allegations on Michael Jackson's life and career cannot be overstated. Before the accusations, he was untouchable. After the settlement, he was forever marked. His music continued to sell. His concerts still drew massive crowds. But the shadow of suspicion never fully lifted. Every friendship he had with a child was scrutinized. Every interview, every public appearance, every aspect of his personal life was filtered through the lens of 1993. He became defensive, reclusive, and increasingly erratic. The man who had once been the most famous entertainer in the world became a figure of controversy, a symbol of fame's dark side. Some have argued that the 1993 case was a turning point not just for Jackson, but for the entertainment industry as a whole. It exposed the vulnerability of celebrities to accusations, whether true or false. It demonstrated the power of media narratives to shape public perception. And it raised uncomfortable questions about the relationship between wealth, power, and justice. Could an innocent person be driven to settle a false accusation simply because the cost of fighting it was too high? Could a guilty person use money to escape accountability? The 1993 case offered no clear answers, only more questions. Legal scholars have debated the ethics of the settlement for decades. Some argue that civil settlements in cases involving allegations of abuse should be prohibited, that they allow the wealthy to buy their way out of consequences. Others argue that settlements serve a legitimate purpose, allowing victims to receive compensation without the trauma of a public trial. The Chandler settlement in particular has been cited as an example of how the legal system can fail both the accused and the accuser. Jackson was never convicted of a crime, but the settlement ensured that he would never fully clear his name. Jordan Chandler received financial compensation, but he was never able to see his accusations tested in a court of law. The 1993 case also highlighted the limitations of the criminal justice system in dealing with allegations of child abuse. Physical evidence in such cases is often minimal or non-existent. Testimony is frequently the only evidence available, and that testimony is subject to all the limitations of human memory and perception. Prosecutors must weigh the likelihood of conviction against the cost of a trial, both to the alleged victim and to the public. In the Jackson case, they made the decision not to proceed. Whether that decision was the right one depends entirely on which version of events you believe. In the years since, new information has occasionally surfaced. In 2003, court documents from the 1993 case were partially unsealed, revealing some of the details of Jordan Chandler's allegations. The descriptions were graphic and disturbing, detailing alleged acts of abuse that, if true, would constitute serious crimes. Jackson's supporters have pointed out inconsistencies in those descriptions, noting that some details did not match the physical evidence gathered during the investigation. Critics have argued that minor inconsistencies are common in child testimony and do not necessarily indicate fabrication. One of the most controversial aspects of the case was the role of the media. From the moment the allegations became public, tabloids and television networks treated the story as a scandal, not an investigation. Headlines assumed guilt. Photographs of Jackson were manipulated to make him appear more sinister. Anonymous sources, many of whom had no direct knowledge of the case, were quoted as experts. The presumption of innocence, a cornerstone of the American legal system, seemed to evaporate in the face of ratings and sales. Jackson's legal team later argued that the media coverage made a fair trial impossible, that public opinion had been so poisoned that no jury could have been impartial. Whether that argument would have held up in court is unknown, because the case never went to trial. The financial details of the settlement remain murky. The $22 million figure that is most commonly cited includes not just the payment to Jordan Chandler, but also payments to his parents and to their legal team. Some reports suggest that the total cost to Jackson, including legal fees and other expenses, was closer to $30 million. That money came from Jackson's personal fortune, not from his record label or management. It was a staggering sum, even for someone of Jackson's wealth. The settlement agreement also reportedly included provisions that would penalize the Chandler family if they ever spoke publicly about the case. Those provisions have been enforced to varying degrees over the years, though leaks and unofficial statements have occasionally emerged. One question that has never been fully answered is what role, if any, Jackson's advisors played in the decision to settle. Some insiders have claimed that Jackson was against the settlement, that he wanted to fight the allegations in court and prove his innocence. They argue that his legal team and managers pressured him into settling, fearing the damage a trial would do to his career and brand. Others have said that Jackson understood the risks of a trial, that he knew the media would turn it into a circus, and that he made the decision himself. Without access to private conversations and internal documents, it's impossible to know for certain. What is clear is that the settlement was a calculated risk, one that prioritized short-term damage control over long-term reputation. The 1993 case also had a profound impact on Jackson's relationship with his family. Some members of the Jackson family publicly supported him, insisting that he was innocent and that the allegations were motivated by greed. Others were more ambiguous in their statements, neither fully defending him nor condemning him. The strain of the accusations added to existing tensions within the family, tensions that had been building for years due to financial disputes, personal conflicts, and the pressures of fame. Jackson's mother, Catherine, stood by him throughout the ordeal, but the case took a visible toll on her. His siblings, particularly his sister LaToya, made controversial statements during this period, some of which seemed to suggest that they believed the allegations. LaToya later recanted those statements, claiming she had been manipulated by her then-husband, but the damage was done. For the public, the 1993 case created a lasting divide. Some people believed that Jackson was guilty, that the settlement was proof of his guilt, and that he used his wealth and fame to avoid justice. Others believed that he was innocent, that he was the victim of a shakedown, and that the media and the Chandler family had conspired to destroy him. That divide persists to this day. Every new piece of information, every documentary, every interview is filtered through the lens of that initial belief. People see what they want to see, interpret evidence in ways that confirm their existing views, and dismiss anything that contradicts them. The psychological impact on Jordan Chandler is something that can only be speculated about. If the allegations were true, he was a child who suffered abuse and then had to watch his abuser be celebrated and defended by millions of people around the world. If the allegations were false, he was a child who was manipulated by his father into making accusations that ruined a man's life and his own. Either scenario is tragic. Either scenario leaves deep scars. Jordan's decision to remain silent suggests that he has chosen to protect himself from further trauma, but that silence also means that one of the key voices in the story will likely never be heard. The legal precedent set by the 1993 settlement has been cited in other high-profile cases involving allegations of abuse. It demonstrated that settlements can be an effective way to resolve civil claims without a trial, but it also showed the risks of settling. For the accused, a settlement can look like an admission of guilt, even when it explicitly states otherwise. For the accuser, a settlement can provide financial compensation, but no sense of justice or closure. The 1993 case became a cautionary tale, a reminder that the legal system is imperfect, that truth is often elusive, and that the court of public opinion operates by its own rules. In the decades since, the 1993 case has been re-examined countless times. Documentaries have been made. Books have been written. Online communities have dissected every detail, every document, every statement. Some of those examinations have been rigorous and fair. Others have been sensationalistic and biased. The sheer volume of information, much of it contradictory, makes it nearly impossible for a casual observer to form a definitive conclusion. And perhaps that's the point. Perhaps the 1993 case is not a puzzle with a clear solution, but a complex web of human behavior, legal strategy, media influence, and moral ambiguity. Michael Jackson's own statements about the case were consistent over the years. He maintained his innocence. He described the allegations as a betrayal by people he had tried to help. He expressed anger at the media for what he saw as a rush to judgment, but he also acknowledged the impact the case had on him. In interviews, he spoke about the pain of being suspected of something so heinous, the loneliness of being isolated from the public, and the difficulty of continuing to make music while under such scrutiny. His 1995 album History included songs that many interpreted as responses to the allegations, tracks filled with anger, defiance, and despair. The settlement did not end Jackson's legal troubles. In 2003, another accusation of child abuse was made, this time by a boy named Gavin Arvizo. That case went to trial. Jackson was acquitted on all counts. The prosecution tried to use the 1993 case as evidence of a pattern of behavior, but the judge limited what could be introduced. Jordan Chandler did not testify. The Arvizo case, while legally distinct, was inevitably compared to the 1993 allegations. For Jackson's supporters, the acquittal in 2005 vindicated him, proving that the accusations had always been false. For his critics, the acquittal simply meant that the prosecution had failed to meet the burden of proof, not that Jackson was innocent. The financial burden of the settlement and the subsequent legal battles took a toll on Jackson's finances. By the mid-2000s, he was facing serious debt. His spending had always been extravagant, but the legal fees and settlements had accelerated his financial decline. He sold assets. He borrowed money. He planned a comeback tour, the This Is It concerts, which were intended to restore his fortune and his reputation. He died in June 2009, just weeks before the tour was set to begin. The cause of death was acute propofol intoxication, administered by his personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray. Jackson's death reignited debates about his legacy, his guilt or innocence, and the cost of fame. In the years after his death, the 1993 case was revisited once again. The 2019 documentary Leaving Neverland featured two men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, who alleged that Jackson had abused them as children. Neither of them was connected to the 1993 case, but their allegations brought renewed attention to the earlier accusations. Critics of the documentary pointed out that both Robson and Safechuck had previously defended Jackson, even testifying on his behalf during the 2005 trial. Supporters of the documentary argued that it is common for abuse survivors to deny or minimize their experiences for years before coming forward. The debate became polarized, with both sides accusing the other of bias and dishonesty. Jordan Chandler's silence during the Leaving Neverland controversy was notable. If he had been willing to corroborate the allegations made by Robson and Safechuck, it might have shifted public opinion. But he said nothing. Some interpreted his silence as evidence that his own allegations had been false. Others argued that he had no obligation to relive his trauma for the sake of public debate. The truth, as with so much of the 1993 case, remains unclear. The legal mechanisms that allowed the settlement to happen are worth examining. In the United States, civil settlements are a common way to resolve disputes without going to trial. They save time, money, and emotional energy for both parties. But they also create ethical dilemmas, particularly in cases involving serious allegations. Should a person accused of a crime be allowed to settle a civil case before a criminal investigation is complete? Should financial compensation be seen as justice for a victim, or as a way for the wealthy to avoid accountability? These questions have no easy answers, and the 1993 case illustrates why. The role of Evan Chandler in the case cannot be ignored. His behavior before, during, and after the allegations has been scrutinized endlessly. The phone call in which he allegedly discussed winning big and destroying Jackson has been used as evidence of his true motives. His decision to administer sodium amytal to his son has been criticized as manipulative and unethical. His later legal disputes and eventual estrangement from Jordan have been cited as proof that he was more interested in money than in protecting his child. But it's also possible to view his actions through a different lens. If he genuinely believed his son had been abused, his anger and determination to hold Jackson accountable might have driven decisions that, in hindsight, appear questionable. The problem is that we will never know with certainty what Evan Chandler believed or what his true motivations were. The 1993 case raises broader questions about how society handles allegations of abuse, particularly when they involve powerful and beloved figures. The instinct to defend someone we admire is strong. The instinct to believe an accuser who has nothing to gain is equally strong. These instincts often clash, creating divisions that can last for decades. The Jackson case is not unique in this regard. Similar dynamics have played out in other high-profile cases, from athletes to politicians to entertainers. What makes the Jackson case particularly complex is the combination of factors: the involvement of a child, the settlement that prevented a trial, the media frenzy, and the enduring legacy of one of the most famous people in history. For those who believe Jackson was innocent, the 1993 case is a tragedy. It is the story of a man who was falsely accused, who paid a fortune to make the accusations go away, and who spent the rest of his life under a cloud of suspicion. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of false allegations and the ease with which reputations can be destroyed. For those who believe Jackson was guilty, the 1993 case is an equally tragic story, but for different reasons. It is the story of a child who was abused by someone he trusted, whose father sought justice the only way he knew how, and whose voice was silenced by money and legal maneuvering. It is a cautionary tale about the ways in which wealth and power can insulate the guilty from consequences. The truth is that we may never know what really happened between Michael Jackson and Jordan Chandler in 1993. The settlement ensured that the case would never be fully litigated. The lack of criminal charges means that no jury ever weighed the evidence and reached a verdict. The silence of the key participants means that new information is unlikely to emerge. What we are left with is a historical record that is incomplete, contradictory, and open to interpretation. We have court documents, media reports, secondhand accounts, and speculation. We have a settlement agreement that admits no wrongdoing but pays millions of dollars. We have a criminal investigation that concluded without charges but left questions unanswered. The 1993 case is a reminder that legal outcomes and moral truths are not always the same. A person can be legally innocent but morally guilty, or legally guilty but morally innocent. The legal system is designed to determine guilt or innocence based on evidence and procedure, not on absolute truth. It is imperfect by design because it is created and operated by imperfect human beings. The 1993 case exposed those imperfections in a very public way. It showed how a case can be resolved without ever being truly decided, how a settlement can provide closure for some while leaving others with unanswered questions. In the end, the 1993 allegations against Michael Jackson and the settlement that followed represent one of the most complex and controversial chapters in the history of celebrity and justice. It is a story without a clear villain or a clear hero, without a satisfying resolution or a definitive conclusion. It is a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about belief, evidence, power, and truth. And it is a story that, more than 3 decades later, continues to provoke debate, division, and reflection. Whatever you believe about what happened in 1993, one thing is certain. The case changed Michael Jackson's life. It changed the Chandler family's life. And it changed the way we think about accusations, settlements, and the search for justice in a world where the truth is not always easy to find.